Hello, seventh graders. Mr. Farley here. Today we're going to look at 17.4, Chapter 17, Section 4, titled The Hardships of War. Going to talk about what it was like for soldiers, for civilians during the American Civil War. 17.4, we're looking at three vocab terms at the top of your sheet. Let's look at those three terms now. First word is draft, which is the selection for required service in the military. When we talk about a draft, we're talking about people being called to serve in the military. Right now, today, we have an all-volunteer force in the military. In other words, people who join the military join because they want to join. They volunteer to serve. This is not always the case in our nation's history. A draft is when people are selected for required service in the military. Second term is inflation, which is a rise in prices. And the third term is income tax, which is a tax on money that you earn. We'll see how each of these terms apply in today's mini lecture on the hardships of war. Let's start with the first paragraph here. Life for soldiers during the Civil War was difficult. And we have a number of videos that we will use and share with you to help illustrate this point. They slept on the ground in rain and snow. New weapons made fighting even more deadly. In most battles, 1/4 or more of the soldiers were killed or wounded. And by today's standards, because of poor medical care, many soldiers died of infections and diseases. In fact, most of the casualties, most of the people who died during the Civil War would die due to infection or diseases. If captured, soldiers faced terrible conditions in prison camps. Okay, soldiers would often be captured and would be kept as a prisoner of war, a POW. Conditions in those camps was excruciatingly difficult. We'll look at a video clip on the Andersonville camp, which will highlight some of the treatment of soldiers in prison camps. Both sides faced difficult problems at home during the course of the war. In the North, many people called Copperheads opposed the war. Fewer men volunteered to fight, so Congress passed a draft law. And this draft law in the North led to violent riots in major cities, including New York City in 1863. The North and the South also faced economic problems. Both regions experienced inflation, which was rise in the prices of consumer goods. And in order to pay for the war, both the North and the Confederacy began an income tax. The first time an income tax will be used in our country will be during the Civil War. This income tax was placed on all tax-paying Americans to help fund the cost of the war. And it was also placed on Confederate citizens to help pay for the Confederate expenses during the course of the war. Profiteers also charged high prices for needed supplies, and we'll take a moment in class today to explain exactly what profiteering is. However, the economic problems that were felt with much more difficulty and harshness in the South than in the North. The war stopped the cotton trade in the South, the most important part of the Southern economy. And the Northern blockade also created severe shortages of food in the South. If you remember early in the Civil War unit, we talked about one of the key goals of the Union in order to win the war. One of the key tactics would be to blockade Southern ports. And this blockade in many places was 90% or better in terms of its success rate. It kept the South from getting a lot of the things that they needed. In both the North and the South, women played a key role, and we will look at the role of women when we examine the chart at the bottom of the page in a moment. Many women served as nurses, improving medical care for soldiers. Some women were soldiers and spies. We've talked about, for example, Harriet Tubman would serve. One of her many roles that she would take on in her life would be she would serve as a spy during the American Civil War for the Union. Also, some women would conceal their identity and serve as soldiers. At home, on the home front, women raised money and collected supplies, including food. And as men left for the battlefields, women were charged, women were responsible for taking jobs in industry and maintaining the family farm on the homeland. Let's take a look at the chart at the bottom of the page now. Let me just flip my picture to the other side so we don't have me blocking the chart. Okay, that's better. Let's talk about women in the Civil War and the roles that some of the more important figures played. If you look at the top here, Loretta Janetta Velasquez fought for the South at Bull Run and at Shiloh, two of the major battles that we've talked about, the Battle of Bull Run or Manassas and the bloody battle at Shiloh early on in the war. Also, Rose Greenough was a spy for the South in Washington, D.C. Rose Greenough was mentioned numerous times in the Civil War documentary clips that we presented in class as part of this unit. Rose Greenough. Dorothea Dix, who we remember from our reform unit. Dorothea Dix served as the chief of nurses for the Union during the American Civil War. So in addition to reforming in the 1840s and 50s, she shifted gears when the war begins and she becomes the head of nursing for the Union. Clara Barton would serve also as a nurse. Clara Barton, and she would also establish the American Red Cross. Sojourner Truth, another important African-American woman that would work extensively during the course of the American Civil War. She worked in Union hospitals, and she also worked in camps for freed slaves, providing medical care to freed slaves from 1861 to 1865 during the course of the war. And finally, Sally Tompkins opened up a hospital in Richmond, Virginia. So there are just a number, 6, but it gives you an example of some of the vital roles that women would play during the course of the Civil War. And after the Civil War ends, a lot of these experiences, a lot of these accomplishments of women during the American Civil War are going to open up more and more opportunities for American women moving forward. And we'll talk more about that. You'll talk more about that when you get into 8th grade next year and you start to look at the progressive movement and the roles, the expanding roles that women will obtain once they earn the right to vote in 1920 as Americans. But for now, let's look at the questions at the bottom of the page that relate to our reading. Question 1 is based entirely on the reading. Describe the life of a soldier during the Civil War. Again, question 1 will be based on the reading. And the chart skill question will be based on the chart we just looked at. Which of the women listed on the chart worked with the sick and wounded? Which of the women listed on the chart worked with the sick and the wounded? When we come back for our next and final mini lecture of the year, we will talk about the ending of the war in Chapter 17, Section 5, and we will see you for that lesson during the next class. Till then, stay safe, 7th graders.